we are learning about George Washington, Commander-in-Chief. Before we can get started on that, we are going to review what we have already learned. Here we go. Who wrote the Declaration of Independence? Thomas Jefferson for the Second Continental Congress. What did the Declaration of Independence do? It explained why the 13 colonies no longer wanted to be controlled by Britain, and it made the colonies an independent nation. Okay? How do we celebrate the Declaration of Independence today? On the 4th of July, a lot of the times with fireworks and maybe cookouts. What is the legend of Betsy Ross? She made the first official flag for the United States. What did that flag look like? It had 13 red and white stripes and 13 white stars on a blue background. Today, you're going to learn more about some of the important events that happened during the Revolutionary War. I want you to listen to learn about one of George Washington's important jobs as the Commander-in-Chief of the new Army. You will remember that while representatives to the Second Continental Congress met and signed the Declaration of Independence, George Washington was far away from Philadelphia. What was the Declaration of Independence? It was the document that stated that the colonies were no longer under control by Great Britain. He was sent north to Boston to fight the British. His was a very difficult job. Washington's army was made up mostly of farmers with no military experience at all. They had no uniforms and only old guns called muskets, which they hardly knew how to fire. There weren't enough guns, and there was hardly any gunpowder. The wording of the Declaration of Independence was approved on July 4th, 1776. 5 days later, messengers carrying copies of the Declaration reached New York, where General Washington's army was camped. His army heard the words and rallied in support of independence. A statue of King George was melted down into bullets for the Continental Army. How do you think the army felt when they heard about their declaration? They were probably pretty excited, right? They were like, yeah, we got this. We're going to declare our independence. We can win this fight. The men soon realized that they would never have enough bullets for the fight ahead. Later that summer, British warships were spotted entering New York's harbor. King George had gotten help from the Germans as well. Germans are people who are from Germany, okay, which is another country on the continent of Europe. More than 30,000 trained troops arrived to fight the unprepared colonial militiamen. George Washington nearly lost his army in the fierce fighting around New York and New Jersey that fall. The Redcoats chased the Continental Army south across the Delaware River. Thinking that they scared them off, the Redcoats left only a small force to guard them on the other side of the river. It was December, and they felt sure that nobody would fight during the dead of winter, but they were wrong. What do you think the colonists did? George Washington came up with a daring plan. Daring means courageous. On Christmas night, he gathered his men together. It was snowing and cold, but Washington had the men get into their boats and row quietly across the ice-filled river. More than 2,000 soldiers crossed the river. The crossings took several hours. Marching through the wind and sleet of the December cold, the Continental Army reached the British troops just before dawn. While the Redcoats were still sleeping, Washington's men launched a surprise attack on the enemy camp. The Redcoats were surprised, all right. Some of them came out of their bunks in their underwear and just held up their hands. It was a total victory for General Washington. Nobody in his army had been killed, and Washington and his army returned to Philadelphia with shouts of joy. But the war was not over yet. The Continental Congress knew that they needed more help in order to win their war for independence. German soldiers were fighting alongside the British. Perhaps the French would send soldiers across the ocean to help the colonists fight against the British. It was no secret that the French and the British had been long-time enemies. The French are people who are from France, which is another country on the continent of Europe. The Continental Congress decided to send some men to France to ask for their support. Their chief representative was 70-year-old Benjamin Franklin. Do you remember who Benjamin Franklin was? Do you remember what he did? Yeah, he's the one who went to Great Britain before the colonies declared their independence. Benjamin Franklin went to Great Britain and served as an unofficial representative and got Great Britain to get rid of some of the taxes, okay? The French did not like to lose in battle, and they were still angry about losing to the British in an earlier war. At first, they did not want to support the colonists. It was crazy to think that an army of farmers could defeat one of the greatest armies in the world, the British Army. If you defeat someone, that means that you win. But an American victory in New York in the fall of 1777 changed their opinion overnight. They promised gunpowder, soldiers, and ships. General Washington's army was camped in Pennsylvania at a place called Valley Forge during the winter of 1777 and 1778. Snow lay on the ground when Washington and his men arrived. They pitched tents and built log cabins, but neither kept out the cold. The men were dressed in rags, and many of them had no shoes, walking barefoot in the snow. There was hardly any food, and some days the men had little to eat and drink other than bread and water. Disease spread through the camp, and many men died. The men missed their families and wanted to go home. Washington struggled to keep up his men's spirits. Washington worked very hard to keep his men from quitting. He camped in a tent beside them for a time, earning their respect. No battles were fought at Valley Forge that winter, but the cold and hungry men spent hours training to be ready when they met the British again in the spring. All right, guys, question time. Think about what you heard today about George Washington as a commander-in-chief. Think about one word that might describe him or his actions. When I think about it, I think he must have been really brave. Because he had to put on a brave face for all of those people that he was training, right? Because if he seemed scared, then his men were probably going to seem scared too. So he had to put on a brave face. He must have been really strong mentally and physically to be able to do all of those things that he did. And he was I think he was a pretty good leader. What about you? What do you think? Do you think he was a good leader? How would you describe George Washington's army? Did they have a lot of fighting experience? Were they trained to fight? No. They didn't have any military experience at first. And they didn't really have many supplies either, you remember? Why were George Washington and his army willing to fight the Redcoats? So why were they going to fight? Because it was something they believed in, guys. They wanted to be independent from Great Britain. They thought it was something that was worth fighting for. What happened on Christmas Day in 1776? I'll give you a hint. Look at that picture. That's your hint. On Christmas Day in 1776, George Washington and his men rowed across the Delaware River and launched a surprise attack on the British, and it was a victory. They won. Remember, it said that some of the British soldiers were so unprepared that they came running out of their tents in only their underwear, and they took their hands up and they were like, "No, we surrender," right? So, now we're going to do our word, okay? Our word of the day. So, you heard me say Washington struggled to keep up his men's spirits. I want you to say the word struggled with me. Say it like a mouse, like a monster, like an old man. In a whisper voice? In a first grade voice? However you want. Struggled. 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 Struggled means to have difficulty and work very hard to accomplish something, okay? I struggled to get up the steps holding that really heavy box. Have you ever struggled with something? I want you to think of a time that you struggled, and I want you to tell me about it using the word struggled when you tell me. So what's that word we've been talking about? Yeah, struggled, which means to have difficulty and work very hard to accomplish something or to get it done. I'm going to ask a question. Be sure to use the word struggled in your answer. Have you ever struggled to get out of bed in the morning? I know I have struggled to get out of the bed in the morning. Sometimes when I'm super tired, it's a big struggle to get out of bed. Have you ever struggled with cleaning your room? I know I sure have, especially when I was little. I used to make these huge messes and then I would struggle to clean them up. Have you ever struggled to find something? I know I have. The other day, I was struggling to find one of my puppy's leashes. I didn't put it back where it belonged, and then I couldn't find it, and I struggled to find it. Have you ever struggled to wait your turn? I think I know the answer for all of you on this one. I know I sure have struggled to wait my turn sometimes. It's hard sometimes, especially when you're a kid. Even when you're a grown-up sometimes, too. All right, guys. Once again, struggled means to have difficulty and to have to work really hard to get something accomplished, okay? I hope that you enjoyed this. I thought this was an exciting story. Talk to you later. Bye.